The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with the nervous chatter of 1,000 different species, their translator devices working overtime to convert alien thoughts into comprehensible language. Ambassador Zelthari of the Krillian Empire adjusted her ceremonial robes, the bioluminescent threads pulsing with her anxiety. Today marked her first day as the youngest ambassador ever appointed to represent her people in the most powerful governing body in known space. The massive circular chamber stretched upward for nearly a kilometer, with tiered seating carved from living crystal that had been grown over millennia. Representatives from across the galaxy filled every seat. From the gaseous Vorthok, who floated in specialized containment suits, to the silicon-based Kandari, whose rocky forms required reinforced platforms. At the chamber's center sat the High Council, 7 ancient beings who had guided galactic civilization for over 10,000 years. Zelthari had studied galactic law for decades, memorizing every treaty, every trade agreement, and every territorial dispute resolution. But there was one law that puzzled her. One rule that seemed almost absurd in its simplicity, yet was enforced with absolute authority. The first law of galactic coexistence stated simply, under no circumstances shall any civilization, regardless of technological advancement or military capability, initiate contact with, provoke, or otherwise disturb the species known as humans within their designated territory of Sol system. The punishment for violating this law was immediate expulsion from the Galactic Council and complete trade sanctions. No explanation was ever given beyond the cryptic warning that the galaxy learned this lesson once, and it must never be repeated. As the session began, High Counselor Threnax, an ancient being whose species had achieved spaceflight when most others were still crawling from primordial oceans, called for order. His voice resonated through the chamber with the weight of millennia. We gather today to address the application of the Vaxorian Republic for expanded mining rights in the Outer Rim territories. Zelthari listened as the debate unfolded, marveling at the complexity of governing billions of worlds and trillions of beings. The Vaxorians were a proud warrior race who had recently achieved faster-than-light travel and were eager to prove themselves worthy of galactic recognition. Their representative, General Korith, stood at attention in his battle-scarred armor, speaking with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Honored counselors, Korith declared, the Vaxorian Republic has conquered every challenge placed before us. Our ships are the fastest, our weapons the most powerful, and our warriors the most skilled in this sector of space. We seek only the resources necessary to expand our glorious empire and bring order to the chaos of uncolonized worlds. High Counselor Threnax nodded slowly. Your application shows impressive territorial expansion, General Korith. However, there is one concerning element. Your proposed mining operations extend dangerously close to the Sol system exclusion zone. Surely you are aware of the restrictions regarding that region? General Korith's mandibles clicked in what Zelthari recognized as Vaxorian amusement. With respect, honored counselor, we have studied your so-called first law extensively. This restriction against disturbing a single primitive system makes little sense to a warrior people. Our long-range scans indicate a species that has barely achieved faster-than-light capability. They possess no significant military fleet, no advanced weaponry, and no territorial expansion beyond their home system. What possible threat could such primitives pose to the mighty civilizations of this council? A collective intake of breath swept through the chamber. Even species that communicated through pheromones or electromagnetic pulses seemed to react with shock. Zelthari felt her bioluminescent patterns dim with worry. In all her studies, she had never encountered anyone who questioned the first law so directly. The silence stretched for long moments before High Counselor Threnax spoke, his voice carrying an edge that made the crystal walls resonate ominously. General Korith, your species is young and has known only victory. This is not uncommon among races that achieve spaceflight through conquest rather than cooperation. However, your ignorance of galactic history is troubling. Another counselor, the ethereal being known as Whisper in the Void, materialized partially into visible spectrum to speak. Perhaps, esteemed colleagues, it is time for another reminder of why the first law exists. Too many young species have forgotten the lesson of the Zephyrian War. Zelthari's studies had mentioned the Zephyrian War only in passing, noting it as a conflict that had ended nearly 3,000 years ago, with the complete disappearance of an entire galactic superpower. The Zephyrian Empire had controlled over 10,000 star systems and possessed technology that other civilizations still couldn't fully understand. Yet somehow, they had simply vanished from the galaxy overnight, leaving behind only empty worlds and silent space stations. General Korath's posture straightened with interest rather than concern. The Zephyrians were clearly weak, if they could be so thoroughly defeated. The Vaxorian Republic fears no enemy, regardless of their past victories. High Counselor Threnax's form shifted, revealing more of his true nature than he usually displayed in council sessions. Ancient and terrible, his presence filled the chamber with the weight of cosmic time. You misunderstand, young general. The Zephyrians were not defeated by another empire or alliance. They were erased by the species you so casually dismiss as primitive. The chamber erupted in whispered conversations as representatives shared information and theories. Zelthari had never heard this version of events before. According to her education, the Zephyrian Empire had collapsed due to internal conflicts and resource depletion, not through military defeat. Korath's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. You expect me to believe that a species that hasn't even established colonies beyond their home system somehow destroyed the most powerful empire in galactic history? This seems more like propaganda designed to maintain your obsolete restrictions than historical fact. Another counselor, the ancient crystalline entity known as Memory Keeper, projected a holographic display into the center of the chamber. The image showed a beautiful blue and green world orbiting a yellow star, with a single large moon. This is Earth, third planet in the Sol system, home to the species known as humans. By all standard measurements, you are correct, General Korath. They appear primitive, disorganized, and militarily insignificant. The display shifted to show human cities, their technology appearing crude compared to even the most basic galactic standards. Their space vessels were chemical-powered rockets that barely managed to escape their planet's gravity well. Their weapons were simple projectile and explosive devices. Their population was confined to a single world with no apparent expansion plans. Yet, Memory Keeper continued, this species possesses something that our advanced civilizations lost millennia ago. Something that the Zephyrians learned about too late to save themselves. General Korath studied the images with growing confusion. I see nothing remarkable here. Their technology is thousands of years behind ours. Their society appears fragmented and chaotic. What could such beings possibly possess that would threaten advanced civilizations? High Counselor Threnax gestured, and the holographic display changed to show archived footage from 3 millennia past. Massive Zephyrian warships, each the size of a small moon, hung in space around Earth. Their crystal hulls gleamed with power conduits that could reshape matter at the molecular level. Weapon arrays capable of cracking planets, charged with energy that made stars seem dim. The Zephyrians believed as you do, General, Threnax explained. They saw Earth as a perfect candidate for colonization and resource extraction. The humans were primitive, confined to their single world, and seemingly incapable of meaningful resistance. What could go wrong? The footage showed the initial stages of the Zephyrian invasion. Massive ships descended through Earth's atmosphere, while smaller craft began scanning for suitable colony sites. According to the historical records, the Zephyrians had planned to relocate the humans to reservation areas while they terraformed the planet to suit their crystalline biology. But then, something changed in the recorded footage. The organized, methodical advance of the Zephyrian forces began to falter. Ships that had been moving in perfect formation started to scatter. Communication arrays that had been broadcasting coordinated orders fell silent one by one. The massive command vessel that had been orchestrating the entire operation suddenly altered course and began accelerating away from Earth at maximum velocity. What happened? Zelthari found herself asking, her curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. Memory Keeper's crystalline form pulsed with something that might have been remembered pain. The humans fought back, not with advanced technology or superior numbers, but with something the Zephyrians had never encountered in all their conquests across the galaxy. Something that our peaceful civilizations had bred out of ourselves over millions of years of evolution and cooperation. General Korath scoffed. Primitive weapons could never penetrate Zephyrian shielding. Their personal armor alone could withstand direct hits from plasma cannons. You're thinking like a civilized being. Whisper, in the void, interjected, her partially visible form flickering with agitation. The Zephyrians made the same mistake. They expected the humans to fight like a proper spacefaring civilization. With rules. With honor. With predictable tactics and objectives. Instead, they encountered something that defied all military logic. The holographic display showed snippets of combat footage recovered from damaged Zephyrian recording devices. Humans using primitive chemical explosives in ways that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Tactics that prioritized causing maximum psychological damage over strategic objectives. Weapons improvised from common materials that somehow proved effective against technology thousands of years more advanced. But it wasn't the footage that disturbed Zelthari most. It was the growing horror in the voices of the counselors as they recounted events they had clearly witnessed firsthand. The humans didn't just fight to defend their territory, Memory Keeper continued. They fought to completely annihilate their enemies. No prisoners, no negotiations, no quarter given or expected. When a Zephyrian patrol was captured, the humans would study their technology, their biology, their communication methods, and then turn that knowledge into more effective ways of killing them. High Counselor Threnax's form darkened with the weight of ancient memory. The Zephyrians had conquered 1,000 worlds, absorbed dozens of civilizations, and faced every form of resistance imaginable, but they had never encountered a species that treated warfare not as a means to an end, but as an art form to be perfected through the complete destruction of the enemy. General Korath's confident posture was beginning to waver as the implications of the story sank in. But surely, superior technology would eventually prevail. Numbers, firepower, orbital supremacy, these things matter in warfare. The humans turned the Zephyrians' advantages against them. Whisper in the void replied. They captured enough technology to understand Zephyrian biology and psychology. They learned to create viruses that specifically targeted Zephyrian neural systems. They developed tactics that exploited the rigid command structure that had made the Empire so effective against civilized opponents. The holographic display shifted to show the final recorded transmission from the Zephyrian command fleet. A crystalline being that might once have been regal, now cowered in terror as alarms blared throughout the ship. Behind the commander, other Zephyrians lay motionless, their crystal bodies dulled and cracked. In the background, barely visible in the recording, human figures moved through the ship with methodical purpose, implementing what could only be described as the systematic extermination of every living being aboard. The last Zephyrian transmission was a galaxy-wide warning, Memory Keeper concluded. A plea for all civilizations to avoid Earth at all costs. Within 6 months of their first contact with humanity, the entire Zephyrian Empire had ceased to exist. Not conquered, not absorbed, not defeated, completely eliminated, as if it had never been. End quote. The chamber fell into absolute silence as the implications of this history lesson settled over the assembled representatives. Zelthari felt her understanding of galactic politics shifting fundamentally. The first law wasn't an arbitrary restriction. It was a quarantine protocol designed to protect every living being in the galaxy from a species so lethally effective at warfare that they had accidentally genocided their cross opponents while defending their single world. General Korath's voice was barely a whisper when he finally spoke. But that was 3,000 years ago. Surely they have evolved, become more civilized, less dangerous. High Counselor Thrainax's response carried the finality of absolute authority. General Koreth, your mining proposal is denied. Furthermore, I strongly suggest that the Vaxorian Republic review its territorial expansion plans to ensure they maintain appropriate distance from the Sol System exclusion zone. The galaxy learned this lesson once at an unacceptable cost. We will not allow it to be repeated. As the session concluded and representatives began filing out of the chamber, Zelthari remained in her seat, staring at the now empty display area where images of Earth had been shown. Somewhere out there, beyond the vast exclusion zone that surrounded their single star system, lived a species so terrifyingly effective at warfare that the entire galaxy had agreed to simply pretend they didn't exist, rather than risk another encounter. The question that troubled her most wasn't whether the humans were still dangerous after 3 millennia of isolation. It was what they might have become during all those centuries when they thought they were alone in the universe, developing their capabilities with no one to warn them about the consequences of their own nature. Ambassador Zelthari spent sleepless cycles in her quarters after the council session, poring through classified archives that her new security clearance allowed her to access. The deeper she dug into the historical records, the more disturbing the truth became. The Zephyrian War hadn't been a single conflict, but rather a systematic campaign of extinction that had lasted exactly 47 standard days, from first contact to the final silence from the last Zephyrian outpost. The archived reports painted a picture that defied military logic. The Zephyrians had possessed overwhelming technological superiority, numerical advantages, and strategic positioning. Their empire controlled supply lines spanning thousands of light years. Their fleets could glass planets from orbit, and their individual soldiers were enhanced with cybernetic implants that made them nearly indestructible by conventional standards. Yet, the humans had somehow turned each of these advantages into vulnerabilities. When Zephyrian ships blockaded Earth from orbit, humans had used captured gravity manipulation technology to turn their own moon into a kinetic weapon, launching chunks of lunar material at relativistic speeds toward enemy positions. When Zephyrian ground forces established fortified positions, humans had released engineered bacteria that fed on the crystalline materials of Zephyrian technology, causing their equipment to literally dissolve around them. Most disturbing of all were the psychological warfare tactics documented in the recovered files. Humans had learned to mimic Zephyrian communication frequencies, broadcasting false orders that sent entire fleets into carefully prepared ambushes. They had studied Zephyrian social structures and exploited them ruthlessly, turning allied units against each other through precisely crafted misinformation campaigns. Zelthari was reviewing a particularly chilling report about human infiltration techniques when her door chimed. She opened it to find General Koreth standing in the corridor, his usually pristine armor bearing obvious signs of hasty travel. His mandibles clicked nervously as he requested permission to enter. "Ambassador Zelthari," he began, once she had secured her quarters for private conversation. "I need to know everything you've learned about the humans. My government is reconsidering our position regarding the Sol System exclusion zone." She gestured for him to sit, noting the way his warrior's confidence had been replaced by something approaching genuine fear. "What has changed since the council session?" 9. Koreth activated a portable holographic projector, displaying a star map that showed Vaxorian territory. Several systems near their border with the exclusion zone pulsed with warning indicators. 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected unusual gravitational anomalies near the edge of human space. At first, our scientists assumed they were natural phenomena, perhaps gravitational waves from a distant neutron star collision. The display zoomed in on one particular system, showing what appeared to be empty space with subtle distortions in the local gravity field. But when we sent an automated probe to investigate, we discovered something that has terrified our military command. The humans have been building something massive and completely invisible to our sensors. Zelthari studied the readings, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to deep purple with concern. What kind of construction could create gravitational signatures like these without being detectable through normal means? That's exactly what we want to know. Karith replied grimly. Our probe managed to collect data for approximately 12 minutes before it was destroyed. Not disabled, not captured. Completely vaporized by some form of weapon we couldn't even detect firing. The destruction was so thorough that no debris remained to analyze. The implications sent chills through Zelthari's crystalline bone structure. If humans had advanced to the point where they could build massive installations that were completely invisible to galactic standard sensors, what else might they have developed during 3 millennia of isolation? There's more, Korith continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The probe's final transmission included brief sensor readings from something it detected just before being destroyed. The gravitational signature wasn't from a construction project. It was from ships, hundreds of them, possibly thousands, all held in perfect formation around what our analysts believe is some form of mobile space station. Zelthari accessed her archaeological files, cross-referencing the gravitational readings with historical data about Zephyrian technology. The numbers made her bioluminescence flicker with alarm. General, according to these calculations, the mass readings your probe detected suggest individual vessels significantly larger than Zephyrian dreadnoughts. If humans have built a fleet of that magnitude, then every civilization in the galaxy is at risk, Korith finished. Which brings me to why I'm here. The Vaxorian High Command has authorized me to request access to any additional information the Galactic Council might possess about human capabilities. We need to know what we're dealing with. Zelthari hesitated before making a decision that would change both their lives forever. There are deeper archives. Records that are restricted to High Council members and their designated researchers. If you're serious about understanding the threat, I can arrange access, but you need to understand that some knowledge cannot be unknown once learned. An hour later, they stood before the Council's most secure archive facility, where Memory Keeper's crystalline form granted them emergency access to files that had been sealed for 3,000 years. The deeper they delved into the restricted records, the more apparent it became that the official version of the Zephyrian War had been sanitized for general consumption. The true scope of human capabilities during that conflict was staggering. According to the classified reports, humans had developed and deployed biological weapons that specifically targeted the neural chemistry of non-human species. They had created viruses that could adapt and evolve in real time to overcome any biological defense systems. Most terrifyingly, they had demonstrated the ability to corrupt and reprogram advanced AI systems, turning entire automated fleets against their creators. This report claims they managed to hack into the Zephyrian collective consciousness, Zelthari read aloud, her voice trembling. They didn't just defeat the Empire militarily. They turned the Zephyrians' own telepathic network into a weapon against them. Memory Keeper's form pulsed with ancient pain as she provided additional context. The Zephyrians communicated through shared mental links that connected every individual in their species. It was their greatest strength, allowing for perfect coordination across vast distances. The humans learned to access these links and feed false information directly into Zephyrian minds. Karith stared at the holographic displays showing the final days of the war. They drove an entire species insane from within their own thoughts? Worse than that, Memory Keeper replied. They made the Zephyrians believe that their own victory was imminent even as their empire crumbled around them. The last Zephyrian commander died convinced that he had successfully conquered Earth, never realizing that his fleet had been destroyed weeks earlier and he was trapped alone in a human simulation. The archive revealed even more disturbing details about human psychological warfare capabilities. They had demonstrated an unprecedented understanding of alien psychology, exploiting species-specific fears and cultural taboos with surgical precision. Against the proud Kandari, they had used tactics that targeted the silicon-based species' deepest shame about their slow reproductive cycles. Against the gaseous Vorthak, they had developed weapons that could compress atmospheric beings into solid matter, essentially turning them into their own worst nightmare. But the most troubling aspect, Memory Keeper continued, was their apparent enjoyment of the conflict itself. Other species fight for territory, resources, or survival. The humans seemed to treat warfare as an intellectual puzzle to be solved through creativity and innovation. They appeared to genuinely enjoy finding new ways to defeat superior opponents. Korath accessed a file that contained psychological profiles developed by Zephyrian analysts during the war. The conclusions were deeply unsettling. Human society was apparently structured around competitive conflict at every level, from individual relationships to global politics. They had developed sophisticated entertainment industries based on simulated violence and strategic competition. Their educational systems included mandatory training in historical warfare and tactical thinking. According to these profiles, Korath read, humans don't just possess natural aptitude for warfare. They've culturally evolved to treat conflict as the highest form of intellectual and physical achievement. They study war the way other species study art or philosophy. Zelthari discovered files detailing human adaptability that made her question everything she thought she understood about biological limitations. During the Zephyrian conflict, humans had demonstrated the ability to function effectively in environments that should have been instantly lethal to their species. They had survived in hard vacuum for extended periods, adapted to alien atmospheric compositions, and even operated effectively at temperatures that should have killed them. This suggests they were already experimenting with biological enhancement 3,000 years ago, she observed. If they've continued developing these capabilities during their isolation, Memory Keeper's response carried undertones of genuine terror. Young ones, you must understand that what you've learned today represents only what the Zephyrians managed to document before their destruction. There were likely human capabilities that were never recorded, technologies and tactics that died with their victims. The archive also contained disturbing evidence about human technological adaptation speed. Analysis of recovered Zephyrian equipment showed that humans had not only reverse-engineered advanced alien technology, but had improved upon it within days of first exposure. They had taken gravity manipulation devices designed for construction and mining and converted them into weapons of mass destruction. They had modified crystalline computing systems to process biological data at rates that exceeded Zephyrian design specifications. They don't just learn from other species' technology, Korath realized, his mandibles clicking with anxiety. They perfect it and then use it more effectively than the original creators. As they prepared to leave the archives, Memory Keeper shared one final piece of information that would haunt both ambassadors for the rest of their lives. The human fleet that your probe detected, General Korath, may not be the most concerning development. Our long-range monitoring stations have detected similar gravitational anomalies in 17 other systems along the edge of human space. If each represents a fleet of equivalent size, the implications were staggering. Humans hadn't just been developing defensive capabilities during their 3 millennia of isolation. They had been building an invasion force that dwarfed anything ever assembled in galactic history. The question wasn't whether they still possessed the terrifying warfare capabilities that had destroyed the Zephyrians. The question was how much more powerful they had become during centuries of unopposed development. That night, as Zelthari lay in her quarters staring at the star charts that showed human space as a vast black void surrounded by warning beacons, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. The humans were no longer content to remain isolated in their single system. After 3,000 years of preparation, they were finally ready to emerge from their self-imposed exile. The only question remaining was whether they planned to make contact as equals seeking peaceful coexistence, or whether they had decided that the time had come to claim their place as the galaxy's new dominant power. Given what she had learned about human nature and capabilities, Zelthari suspected that the distinction might not matter to a species that had turned warfare into an art form and conquest into a science. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened with unprecedented speed, representatives arriving from across known space in response to General Korath's alarming intelligence reports. The massive chamber buzzed with fearful energy as species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves united in collective terror at the prospect of human expansion beyond their exclusion zone. Ambassador Zelthari took her designated seat, noting how the usual political divisions had completely dissolved. The warlike Vaxorians sat beside the pacifist Etherians, while the individualistic Kandari shared data freely with the collective-minded hive worlds. Nothing brought diverse civilizations together quite like an existential threat to all life in the galaxy. High Counselor Threnax materialized at the chamber's center, his ancient form more solid and imposing than Zelthari had ever seen before. The gravity of the situation was evident in the way the cosmic entity's presence seemed to bend space around itself, causing visible distortions in the air. "Fellow beings," Threnax began, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through multiple dimensions. "We face a crisis that may determine the survival of galactic civilization itself. The humans have broken their 3,000-year isolation and appear to be preparing for large-scale expansion beyond their system." The holographic displays activated throughout the chamber, showing real-time sensor data from monitoring stations along the human exclusion zone. The readings were terrifying in their implications. Gravitational distortions that suggested massive fleet movements, energy signatures that indicated industrial activity on a scale never before witnessed, and most disturbing of all, probe launches that were systematically mapping every inhabited system within 50 light-years of Earth. "In the past 72 hours, Threnax continued, human exploration vessels have violated the exclusion zone barrier and conducted reconnaissance missions in 43 separate star systems. These ships demonstrate technology far beyond anything they possessed during the Zephyrian War. They appear completely immune to our sensor networks and capable of instantaneous travel across vast distances." General Korath stood to address the assembly, his warrior's pride replaced by the grim determination of someone who had looked into the abyss and understood its depth. "Honored counselors, the Vaxorian Republic's military analysis suggests that the human reconnaissance missions are not random exploration. They are conducting systematic intelligence gathering with obvious strategic objectives." The display shifted to show a three-dimensional map of local galactic space, with human probe trajectories marked in crimson. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone with military experience. It was a perfect preparation for coordinated invasion across multiple fronts simultaneously. Their probe routes target every major shipyard, manufacturing center, and military installation within their operational radius, Korath explained. "They're not exploring for potential allies or trade partners. They're identifying targets for conquest." Memory Keeper's crystalline form manifested to share additional disturbing intelligence. Analysis of the probe encounters reveals that human technology has advanced exponentially during their isolation. Their vessels demonstrate capabilities that violate our understanding of physical laws. They appear to manipulate gravity, time, and space itself as casually as we manipulate electromagnetic fields. Whisper in the Void materialized to add her own terrifying observations. "More concerning than their technological advancement is their apparent attitude toward other species. Intercepted communications suggest they view the galaxy's civilizations as threats to be eliminated, rather than neighbors to be engaged diplomatically." The chamber erupted in worried conversations as the implications became clear. After 3 millennia of isolation, humans hadn't evolved into a more peaceful species. Instead, they had spent 3,000 years perfecting their already terrifying capacity for warfare while developing technology that made them effectively unstoppable. Ambassador Taval of the Etherian Peace Collective raised a tentacle to request speaking privileges. "Surely there must be some possibility for peaceful contact. No species could maintain aggressive hostility for 3,000 years without outside threats to justify such behavior." High Counselor Threnax's response carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Ambassador Taval, you make the error of judging humans by the standards of civilized species. Our analysis of intercepted human communications reveals that they have spent these millennia not in peaceful isolation, but in constant preparation for galactic warfare. They have maintained and refined their military capabilities through continuous, simulated conflicts and technological development programs. The displays showed fragments of human communication intercepts, translated through advanced linguistic analysis programs. The content was chilling in its matter-of-fact discussion of galactic conquest strategies, optimal target prioritization for eliminating potential resistance, and detailed plans for the systematic occupation of inhabitable worlds. They refer to the rest of us as the Galactic Federation of Sitting Ducks. Threnax continued. Their strategic planning documents indicate they have been monitoring our activities through unknown means for centuries, cataloging our weaknesses and planning countermeasures for every known military capability in galactic civilization. Representative Quecks of the Hive Worlds transmitted a burst of pheromone-encoded terror that required translation for non-chemical communicators. The collective consciousness detects no possibility of successful resistance. Human capabilities, as demonstrated, exceed theoretical maximums for achievable military technology. Survival probability for galactic civilization approaches zero. The brutal honesty of Hive World analysis sent waves of despair through the chamber. If the mathematically oriented collective species saw no path to victory, the situation was truly hopeless. But General Korath stood again, his mandibles set in grim determination. Fellow representatives, I have served the Vaxorian military for 300 standard years. I have studied warfare across dozens of campaigns and strategic scenarios. There is one aspect of the human threat that we may be able to exploit. The chamber fell silent as desperate beings grasped for any possibility of hope. The humans are planning for war against the galaxy as they remember it from 3,000 years ago, Korath explained. Their strategic assessments are based on our historical capabilities and political structures. They may have underestimated how much we have advanced during their isolation. High Counselor Threnax's expression suggested skeptical interest. Continue, General. The galactic civilizations they destroyed 3 millennia ago were individual empires competing against each other, Korath said. They expect to face divided opponents, fighting with obsolete technology and predictable tactics. They have not prepared for unified resistance using our modern collaborative defense networks. Memory Keeper's crystalline form pulsed with what might have been hope. You propose active alliance between all galactic civilizations for coordinated resistance? More than alliance, Korath replied. Complete integration of all military assets, technology sharing across species barriers, and coordinated strategic planning that treats the entire galaxy as a single defensive unit. The humans have spent 3,000 years preparing to defeat us individually. We need to become something they have never encountered, a truly unified galactic civilization. The proposal was revolutionary and terrifying in its implications. Species that had maintained strict technological secrecy for millions of years would need to share their most advanced capabilities. Civilizations that had never cooperated beyond basic trade agreements would need to integrate their military command structures completely. But as the representatives considered the alternative, systematic extermination by a species that had perfected genocide as a military science, the choice became clear. Ambassador Zelthari stood to address the assembly, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through formal diplomatic configurations. The Krillian Empire pledges complete cooperation with any unified defense initiative. We will share our gravitational manipulation technologies and submit our fleet command structure to galactic coordination. One by one, representatives from across known space stood to make similar commitments. The pacifist Etherians offered their advanced defensive shield technologies. The Hive Worlds pledged their collective consciousness capabilities for instantaneous strategic communication. Even the isolationist Void Dancers agreed to share their dimensional manipulation abilities for the common defense. Within hours, the largest military alliance in galactic history had formed, bound together by the shared knowledge that failure meant extinction for every living being in known space. But even as they planned and prepared, deep space monitoring stations continued to report increasingly disturbing developments from human space. The gravitational signatures around Earth were intensifying, suggesting that whatever the humans had built during their isolation was approaching operational readiness. High Counselor Threnax concluded the emergency session with words that would be remembered throughout galactic history. We face an enemy that has turned warfare into an art form and conquest into a science. They possess technology that defies our understanding and capabilities that exceed our theoretical maximums. Our only advantage is that they expect to face the galaxy they remember, not the unified civilization we must become. As representatives departed to begin the unprecedented integration of galactic military assets, Zelthari remained behind to study the latest intelligence reports. The numbers were staggering. Human industrial output indicators suggested they had built a war machine capable of simultaneously engaging every major civilization in the galaxy. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the final piece of intercepted human communication that translation systems had just decoded. It was a simple message transmitted across human space, apparently confirming the readiness status of their invasion preparations. The message consisted of just 3 words in the human language, but their translation sent chills through every being who read them. The harvest begins. After 3,000 years of isolation and preparation, humanity was ready to claim its place as the galaxy's apex predator. The only question remaining was whether the hastily assembled Galactic Alliance could achieve the impossible and successfully resist a species that had never known defeat, never accepted surrender, and never shown mercy to those who stood in their way. The galaxy's first rule had been simple: never disturb the humans. Now that rule lay shattered, and every living being in known space would discover whether their collective civilization could survive the consequences of awakening Earth's children from their long slumber.